your room actually behaves as two different rooms depending on the frequencies. So for high frequencies, when the speaker makes the sound, the high frequency will travel and then bounce off the wall and then travel back, bounce again, bounce, bounce, bounce. So it's for high frequencies to mid-range frequencies, your room is a bouncy house for the sound. And then as the sound keeps on bouncing from the walls, it loses energy and it dies off. So that's why a room is not supporting high frequencies that much. There are some interesting cases. So for example, if you have glass and hard reflecting surfaces, then it means that the hard reflecting surface will not absorb the sound, but it will bounce most of it back. And that's why, like an empty room, especially like a stone room, like where the walls are made of stone, it's really echoey and really harsh and bright sounding, because it doesn't absorb the sound, but it reflects it back to you. And then you will have tremendous high energy in your room. And when you have glass windows are even worse, because they start resonating with the high frequencies, and they will add a lot of glare to the high frequency sound, high frequencies. So that's like a special case, when the bouncing doesn't die off, or when the bouncing triggers additional resonance from your glass objects or very rigid objects. And to take care of that, just add curtains and stuff like that to tame it down. So for high frequencies, we can correct the room easily. But what happens for low frequencies? So there is a certain transition point that depends on the size of your room and the volume of air of your room, and above that transition frequency range, your room behaves as a bouncy house, and below that frequency, it behaves as a swimming pool. So it's there are standing waves that are created by the low frequencies. So it means that the room is too small to support a full wave of your frequency, and instead the size can contain only partially that frequency, so it will behave just generating standing waves. So the waves do not have enough space to travel from one surface to another as the high frequency does, but it's stuck in a space, in a small space, and it will start to elicit standing waves. It's just like the guitar strings. So when you pluck a guitar string, if you can take a shot of it with a high-speed camera and slow it down, you will see those standing waves in the guitar strings. And that's what happens in your room when you transition over to a certain size, to below that certain frequency range. Your room will conduct standing waves. And because the wave is standing, it's not traveling, not bouncing anywhere, it's staying there. Its energy is contained in your room. It's not getting dispersed as easily as the bounce, bing, 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 bong, gone. But when you have the standing wave, it just goes on and on. It's just like a guitar string. You pluck it, and bang, and it decays it takes it a long time to decay. So that's the effect that your room does to the sound. And the lower the frequency of the sound, the more the standing wave effect happens. So that's why there's this transition frequency. It's called the Schrdinger frequency. He was the gentleman who observed this phenomena and who described the mathematical model on how to get it, how to calculate it, and what's the amount of energy that is added by your room for these standing waves, and basically how it calculates into real life scenarios. If you have a bedroom that's like a smallish bedroom, this transition frequency occurs around 250 hertz. If it's a really tiny bedroom, maybe 300 hertz. Huge bedroom, maybe 220, but around that frequency. So it means that above this frequency, your room is a bouncy house for the sound. And below this frequency, you have this kiddie pool with the standing waves. And how this behaves is that below this transition frequency, each octave, as you go one octave lower, one octave lower means half the frequency. So if it was 250, the transition frequency, that means that 125 hertz, you are getting up to 6 dB boost at the volume of that frequency, provided that your room is perfectly isolated. So that noise and sound and pressure cannot escape the room. So how this works in real life is if you have a recording studio which is completely soundproofed, so basically it's vacuum sealed, that there are no cracks under the door is really thick, so the sound resonances cannot go through it, the walls are really solid construction, lots of extra layers of special material on it to prevent sound loss. In that case, if it's perfectly isolated, you get a 6 dB boost. If you get 0 dB boost, it means that you are in your garden out there when there are no boundaries. If you have a room that is very poorly isolated, so like you have jalousies, there's like a 1-inch gap at the bottom of your door to have like free access for the cockroaches, then that's going to provide a big leak. That's a huge leak where the sound pressure can escape your room. And eventually, if you have these leaks, they are going to impact first the deepest frequencies. So that's why if you want to have response down to 20 hertz or maybe subsonics, you need to plug these holes. Because for those standing waves to form at let's say like 15 hertz, energy cannot be allowed to escape. If you have the tiniest crack, the pressure will drop along that crack. And the lower the frequency, the greater the pressure, the easier it will be lost. However, if we are talking about mid-bass frequencies, if you have tiny cracks, they will not be much affected. But if we are talking about 20 hertz and such, if you have even like a perfectly insulated room, but your electrical outlet, your AC outlet is not soundproofed, then through that tiny outlet space, most of your 20 hertz energy will leak out to the blessing of your neighbors. So let's go back again to the transition frequency. So in a bedroom it's about 250 hertz, and in living rooms it's between 100 hertz and 200 hertz. 100 hertz is the case of a huge, enormous, ginormous living room. 200 hertz is a case of a medium-ish, smallish size living room. I would say medium-sized living room in Hawaii, and a small size living room on mainland where you have like gigantic places. But for example, in my case, I have about 100 cubic feet air volume size living room, but my living room is open with the kitchen and the hallway area too, and when you do your calculations you have to include that into the airspace as well. And I have also a staircase that goes up to the upper level, and that airspace also needs to be factored in. So like the total airspace is quite big, and the largest dimension of this living room, like from here to the end of the hallway, is about 13 meters. And the Schrödinger frequency, the transition frequency for me is around 140 hertz. So that's like a good point for you to think about what your Schrödinger frequency is. And when we think about concert halls, just imagine how enormous a concert hall is. The Schrödinger frequency there is about 40 hertz, or if it's a really big concert hall, it can be like 20 hertz, even that low. So basically it means that if you go to listen to a symphonic orchestra presentation, and there the room boost where the concert hall stops being a bouncy house for sound, but it becomes a standing wave pool, it's at below 40 hertz. So it means that 20 hertz will get a 6 dB boost, and that's it. The mid bass is getting no boost from your room. But in your home, let's say your living room has a 200 hertz transition frequency, it means that 100 hertz is already getting a plus 6 dB boost if it's perfectly insulated. 50 hertz is getting already then a plus 12 dB boost. 25 hertz will be getting a plus 18 dB boost. And if you change that scenario to a concert hall at 25 hertz, you are getting maybe a plus 5 dB, plus 4 dB boost for it. So that's like 5 dB versus 18 dB boost. That's what the size difference makes. So it's enormous. So that's why if you want to have a speaker system for a concert hall or an auditorium, it has totally different requirements from the system compared to your living room. That's why your speakers designed for your living room do not work at a concert hall or a stadium, because they need totally different bass support. So yep, we went through that bouncy house versus standing waves. And so that's the good news for all of us and everyone who has small rooms, because it means that the boost of your room for the bass already starts at a very high frequency. So it means by the time you get to low frequencies, you are getting tremendous boost from your room. However, so if you think that you completely isolate, completely soundproof your tiny bedroom, which is maybe like a 3 meters by 3 meters bedroom, or 3 by 2, maybe like a 6 foot by 9 foot tiny room, you soundproof it, and then you have like the Schrödinger frequency around 300 hertz, then it means if you go like 4 octaves down, then you get a plus 24 dB boost. So around like 30 hertz, you are like plus 20 plus dB up. So then you do not need such a low end capacity, because your room is going to bump that up for you. And you are right and wrong. If you completely soundproof your room, so it means that you create a perfect vacuum between you and the outer space, then yes, that's the case. But if you have the tiniest cracks, and we do, because we need to breathe, right? You need to have some sort of air exchange, otherwise you will suffocate after a while with your perfect system. So and the more that leakage is, even if you just have an air conditioning unit, then as you go lower in frequencies, the more you will lose. And because of the pressure loss, you will hear more and more only that part that your room can support in frequency mode, where your sound wave fits. And that's the fact that if your room is too small, then it is not physically capable to reproduce the very low frequencies. So in a tiny bedroom, you are never ever going to get 20 hertz. But it doesn't mean that if you put a system that's capable to reproducing 20 hertz at high levels, that that energy is just going to disappear. No. It means that you are not going to hear that 20 hertz in your room, but others who are in the room next to you or the next door neighbors, they will hear that 20 hertz, because your room will act as a loudspeaker that radiates out that 20 hertz energy to your neighbors, and they will get the full brunt of it, and you won't hear anything of that 20 hertz. You will only hear maybe down to 50 hertz, those frequencies that your room supports, and nothing below that. That's why people who are into car stereo and they force their cars to go down to 20 hertz or maybe to subsonic frequencies, it's a total BS and really a major annoyance for everyone, because in the car you are not going to hear anything that's below 40 hertz. So actually your car supports only down to 200 hertz, and below that you are already going to pressure mode, and below 60 hertz or so you are not hearing anything of that in the car, but you are just polluting the outside of the car. So that long 10 meter 20 meter sound wave is going to form outside of your car, and your car will act as an extension to the loudspeaker in your hood, and it will radiate it to your entire neighborhood. Like, I have a couple idiots like that who are the new neighborhood unfriendly drug dealers, and they just blast their subs in their trucks, just announcing that, hey, I'm here with the new stuff, and it's insane. I have a really good soundproofed home, and I can hear, if I'm at the other side of the house, 2 closed doors away, that idiot's sub just boo boo boo, like pounding on the wall. And that's because the really long sound wave, like here's your car and your loudspeaker in the car, it's producing those pressure waves, but it's not, the ear in the car is not capable of hearing that, because the frequency, the sound wave, is not capable of forming in that tiny compartment. But when it leaks out, when the metal surface of the car radiates it out to the surface, then yes, that gigantic, this long size wave. If you had a bus, then yes, you would be able to hear 20 hertz in a party bus. That's why they have party buses, because in a party bus you can hear bass down to 20 hertz and even lower if it's a big bus. But in a car, nope, you are stuck with a very limited frequency range, and all of that extra energy is radiated out to the outside, while in the party bus it can form inside the party bus and it stays in there. So that's why there's not much noise pollution coming from a party bus if they close the door and it's properly built and designed. And then the other case, a single vehicle, personal vehicle, can make the life of an entire neighborhood a misery, just because some idiots crank up the bass to annoy the neighbors because they cannot hear it anyway. So anyway, let's move ahead. Now you know why it's so annoying to have those kind of people and those kinds of cars, right? Those ghetto blaster type of situations. So let's look at an actual situation. This actually I got this from the Acoustic Frontiers website, and it shows actual room response measurements. So they play test tones, frequencies, and this is the frequency range below 300 hertz. And you see that even though they played the frequencies at the same SPL, the room that the speakers were in changed the SPL of these frequencies. So you see this is like 250 hertz, like at 280 hertz or so there's a massive dip in the response, and then it catches up, and then there's a boop, this little dip, big dip around 150 hertz or so, and then it climbs up, and then there's a peak around, what's that, like 75 hertz, and then it drops down at 68 hertz, and there's a tremendous boost here up to like 48 hertz, and that's caused by your room, and then it starts to drop down and the pressure is kept high up, and then it just slowly goes down. But this means that this was a really good room. It was isolated really well because the low frequency energy is held pretty well. And you see that there's like the Schrdinger equation that per octave you get plus 6 dB boost. It's just an approximation, and it works only, like for example here, if we were to make like a straight line, you see that's the climb of the Schrdinger boost, and you can calculate how many dBs per octave it is. It can be like up to 6, but each of these individual peaks can climb above that, but as you see there will be dips below that, and they will average out to the slope that's defined by how well your room is isolated from the outside. And as you see here, below a certain frequency you do not see an extra hump coming up, because that energy is getting lost through your wall, through your windows, through the cracks, AC outlets, stuff like that. And that's because it's relatively easy to make soundproofing that keeps higher sound frequencies, keeps the mid bass in your room. But to soundproof for like down below 30 hertz, it's an almost impossible task, because there's no soundproofing that can stop those low sound waves. The only thing that stops that is if you have a really thick stone wall. So if you want to stop like 15 hertz, you need like a yard or a meter thick stone wall, and that's why they put the organs into cathedrals, because cathedrals, they do have that 1 meter thick stone wall, and they are able to contain the energy of those low pedal notes. And that's why the organ doesn't sound the same in your room, because you do not have that meter thick stone wall, so that bass energy is going to escape from your house. Plus, because of the much size area of your living room versus the church hall, you have the mid bass and the high bass amplified to a much greater degree, represented much louder compared to what the organ sounds in a church room. And so these peaks that you see here, these like bips coming up, they are made worse by smaller rooms, and they are really bad when you are in a square room. And let's just go, why is this happening and what's the importance of that? So all of these bumps and humps, so like you have a hump, another valley, 1 valley, 2 valley, 3 valleys, and those valleys are frequency cancellations, when the sound waves are at such a length that they cancel out each other. And when you have these nice humps here, they are at those, they correspond to the size of your room. So if you have like a certain length and width and certain height, then the height, width and depth, they will be responsible for giving you these peaks. And because that's the frequency that corresponds to the wavelength of that dimension of your room. And because of that, that's why our hearing can compute that what is the room in which you are sitting. So if you close your eyes and you talk, you will know how far away you are sitting from a wall. That is that wall close to me or far away? Because of these fluctuations in the frequency, your brain will calculate your relative position to the room, and you will get the size information for the room. So that's how it works. And the smaller the room is, the bigger these fluctuations are. So that's why it's preferable to have a bigger room. But big is not enough. It has to be the right ratios between the dimensionality of the room, and so that to keep these here these peaks separate from each other, to have several smaller peaks instead of having just fewer but bigger peaks. So what do I want to say? So basically, in the smaller room, the deep bass is not supported, but you get a lot of mid bass support, a huge mid bass support, but relatively low deep bass support, because the deep bass cannot form in your room. And whatever, if you want to put a big system in your room, the low frequencies are going to get lost from your room because of the poor acoustic insulation, and your neighbors will be knocking on your wall while you think that you are not even listening that loud. Sure, it's because you are not hearing the deep bass. Your neighbor is hearing the deep bass. And that's why for a small room you can put in small speakers, because the small room will amplify the mid bass of your small speakers to that level that it will feel balanced. But you won't be able to get deep bass, and even if you put a sub there, it's just going to make it worse for your neighbor. In a big room, you don't get that much mid-bass support. That's why that bookshelf speaker that works in a small room will not work in your big living room, because there is no mid-bass support, so it will sound tiny, squeaky, and not enough punch and bass. So let's see what we can do if we have maybe, let's say you have a small speakers in a bigger room and you don't have bass. What can you do to make it have more bass? Let's see. In this case, this is like an optimal audiophile setup that people want to go for. Is if you have a room about these dimensions and you put your listening chair here, away, like a meter away from your rear wall, and preferably in the middle of the room, equal size from as far away from the two sides as possible. And you want to put your speakers away from the back wall, away from the side wall, both of them, and this is when you will get really good imaging from your speakers. But if they are big speakers, then it's okay, because they can support enough mid bass, and your room length can support enough of the deep bass, so you are in audio heaven. But what if you have your bookshelf speakers, you bring them down from your bedroom, you want to try them out, and they don't have enough bass, and you say, wow, rubbish, I'm throwing them out. Don't throw them out yet, just move them back. Move them closer to the rear wall, move them here, and you will notice that they are catching up mid-bass. But they still don't have enough mid-bass, so what can you do? Move them closer to the corner, so closer to both of the walls, the side walls and the back walls. And that way they are going to pick up more and more bass. And you can just play around what is that position where they have the best bass and still best good imaging, because their imaging will become different and different. So the imaging will change a lot as you go further away from this so-called audiophile optimal position. But I have to add that audiophile optimal position is usually not the best for tonality, That's where you get the most detail level and the most articulated imaging, but that's where you usually get the most uninvolving sound. So like, it's kind of like listening to a porcelain Muppet show. It's like, wow, it's really high def, but it's really fake. So if you move them closer to the walls, then you get a much more authentic, a much more tonally correct sound, but you will lose a lot of that extra definition. But when you have a long audio file experience, then you will realize that a lot of this extra definition is artificial colorations. And what you get, even though you lose imaging and you lose resolution, but it's much closer to the natural sound. It's much more accurate reproduction of what is on the recording compared to what you hear when you pull out your speakers to so-called optimal positions. Yeah, you get most detail level there, but if you were at the real concert, at the event where it was recorded, that's not the details you would have heard there compared to this, because this is adding a lot of extra manufactured details. But that's a totally different and very long topic. So anyway, that's how you can help with your speakers. And then the other case, if your speakers are too boomy, then bring them more away from the walls to lessen their boominess. So like here, this is another scenario where you can, if you move your chair more forward to the speakers, you can also decrease the boominess, because the wall behind you also acts as a room boundary, and the closer you are to it, the more you will hear the bass, and especially deep bass, and the further you are, the less bass. So if your listening position is back here and it's really boomy, then move your chair more forward into the room and you will lose a lot of the boominess. And there's additional situations, but now we are really running over time, so that will be part of a different episode. So I hope this was really useful for everyone. I know it was super long, but this is something that cannot be explained in 2 minutes, or if I squeeze it into 2 minutes, it will go in and it will go out, and you will be none the wiser. If a educational video has some length to it, it gives you the time to absorb it and think about it. So today people think that the best video is if it's just condensed to 2 minutes and it gives me all the information and I can use that information. Okay, I tell you the secret. If there's a video that gives information to you in 2 minutes, it's totally useless. You won't be able to apply it, because 2 minutes is not enough to tell you the information and to tell you how to apply that information. So if you want to gain real knowledge, you have to invest your time into it. So that's why I recommend for everyone who's listening to stick around and educate yourself with my half an hour to an hour long videos, because this will give you truly useful experience that you can translate into your life. Thank you, and sayonara, bye bye.